I'm like, we need some small talk to start this. Although it doesn't feel natural to say I need some small snark. Oh, this is gonna be a bad one.
Small snark.
Welcome to the Better Places podcast. My name is Mike, and with us again is...
Well, I'm Matt. I have a YouTube channel called Metamodernism.
Yes, hi, my name is Nick. I have a channel called The Rural Urbanist. It's one of those channels that when you write it, it looks great. And when you read it in your head, it sounds great. The moment you say it out loud, frick, why did I choose that as my channel name?
This is the Groundhog Day of our podcast, because I think you've said this every single podcast now. Yeah, so I want to talk about public pools. I'm not sure if either of you have ever been to a public pool. That's actually, let's start with that. Matt, have you been to a public pool before?
Yeah, back in my hometown, I think there was like a public pool that some of the schools had their swimming practices at and such. And the pool I would go to most often was actually a private country club, but I would go to this other public pool sometimes.
Yeah, PA has a lot of public pools compared to the rest of the places.
Yeah,
Nick?
I think for me, so we had one big public pool in our town. This public pool was owned by the University of New Hampshire. It was 100 years old, chlorinated to shit, and made with massive paving stones, which were just rough-hewn granite with mortar between them. But over the years, the frost heave had kicked the sharp edges of the stone out.
Yeah.
And so I would say at least once a year, I would cut either my foot or some other part of my body on the bottom of this pool.
And then the chlorine would just make sure it didn't get infected, because it was just, yeah, exactly. It works. It's a perfect cycle.
Exactly. Except then you'd put a Band-Aid on it, but because you're a kid, then you'd immediately go back in the water. And then the pool was just filled with these bleached out Band-Aids, just above the bottom level of the pool. And yeah, that was basically my childhood at the pool. This thing was so large, it was more like a man-made lake.
So yeah, my experience in general, we didn't have any public pools where I grew up. So I never had the experience of going to a public pool until very recently, because we had these things called marina beaches, where along the river, there would be a small little sandy beach that was completely free. And if you know anything about the beaches in New Jersey, the beaches that face the ocean all cost money. Back when I was a kid, they were probably $6 to $7. So if you wanted to go to the beach for free, you can just go to these marina beaches. So that was kind of like our equivalent to a public pool. What's interesting about public pools is the kind of places that actually have the public pools aren't really where you'd think. So there's places like Cleveland, Cincinnati, Atlanta, Pittsburgh, Tucson, Washington, and New Orleans are all the top for the most amount of public pools per capita. And the funny thing that you can pull out of that, it's the Rust Belt, it's a few Sun Belt cities, Washington, and Atlanta. So there's actually a really good reason for this, which I'll get into. But the Atlanta one, I won't get into, because it's actually completely different. It's mostly because of the Olympics is why they have a lot of public pools per capita. So there's a big divide between places that have public pools and don't have public pools. And part of this is a historical reason. So a lot of these public pools were built back during the WPA, the Projects Administration. So they were built in the 30s-ish. And there was also a decent number built right after World War II and right before the recession, where the idea of shortened labor days, you'd actually have time to do leisure after work. So you'd actually have time to go to these public pools. And there was a big focus on the cities because people still lived in the cities. And a lot of the public pools started to go into disrepair, and they stopped making them roughly around the 1950s inside of cities. So obviously there was the issue of segregation, a lot of people of color were just not allowed into these pools. Even in the North, I was reading stories about a public pool in Asbury Park, and there was an oral history where the guy was saying it was 1950s and they were still saying black people couldn't go into the pool, even though it said public pool. So it was even up in the North, this is a big thing. So all of these public pools started to get not maintained, and the only kind of public pools that really exist in our cities now are these WPA project pools that are about 100 years old now.
That sounds like that's probably around the era that the pool in my town came from, also based on the construction. It may be one of those things that they funded or in some way built, but I'd have to look at the history of it. I think that's a really interesting idea that, back when government still did things and that there was an idea that people can have some public benefit from their government. One of the things that was invested in was for leisure pools. Today, I think the only thing that a government would be likely to build, although probably still unlikely, is like a playground, is maybe the most you'll get out.
Yeah.
Most that you'll get out.
Yeah. You don't really get these types of projects that are made for like the middle class, essentially. And that's where we get this new project that is coming in New York, which is the first floating pool on the river since 1938. So New York actually used to have a lot of barge pools. I think it was around 15 of them. One still exists now, and it's been around for a while, and they put it in a part of the water system around New York where it doesn't pull in too much pollution. But in the 1930s, there was a lot of pollution of the water around that time. So they got rid of all of these barge pools. There was also like a cholera epidemic as well. So that kind of like put an end to these. But this is the first one in a long time. And the thing I see about it is it's a luxury pool. This is going to be like tens of millions of dollars, and they're only really getting one out of this. So it's going to be for like pretty wealthy people on the shoreline. It's a beautiful, expensive new pool. And this is kind of what you see from all the new projects in places like New York City, even in like London, stuff like that, is a lot of these public spaces are like multi-billion or tens of millions of dollars for a little bit of space, a little bit of public space. Like, have you seen the Flower Bloom Park that's in New York City? It's near Hudson Yards, I believe.
So it's built for like a very wealthy set.
Yeah, it's like it's private for like half the time in the park.
So tell me more about this public pool that's being built in New York City. I'm really curious. So is it being built like as a custom made Goldie
It's going to be
Gills?
completely new. It is going to be a anchored platform. It's not like a barge. It's actually going to be this like structure that's anchored over the water. And then what they do is they pump the water in from the river and they filter it and pump it into the actual thing.
Where does New York City dump the sewage? Is it below the, I remember seeing a video about it a while ago, but I don't know if it's below that point in the river or if it's above.
Yeah, so this is on the East River, and I think they dump it out closer to the mouth of the bay. I think the station is somewhere in Gowanus. Someone's going to correct me on that. You can correct me on that.
I'm curious, in like the Los Angeles area, are you guys having like public pools? I mean, it seems like it would be, to me, the perfect place for a pool. I mean, everybody has a pool in their backyard, so does the town make them too?
I mean, there's a lot less private pools than a place like Phoenix or Vegas, but there also are quite a few public pools, some of them in various states of disrepair. I think one like interesting situation, kind of like what Mike was talking about with like a pool being for kind of the upper class based on where it's being built. There's like this sort of contentious project in Long Beach, which is south of LA. And they had this old like Olympic pool venue that was built for the last Olympics, but they had like structural stability issues and earthquake resilience issues, so they demolished it many years ago, but the city has constantly been trying to rebuild it, and it's just kind of become this like boondoggle project that everyone complains about because like it would be built in the richest neighborhood of the city because that's where this pool was, but they want a new pool for like the next Olympics in 2028. And then on top of that, since it's like in the coastal zone covered by like, I guess what is called like the Tidelands Fund, like the construction of it would be funded by oil drilling. And since there have been like various laws passed in California restricting oil drilling, especially in places where people live, like the city is now at risk of not getting as much oil money as they previously would. So now they have to like scale back this pool project. And, it's just one of those situations where everybody gets angry.
Yeah, it's a very like Norway
Great.
problem to have. It's like we didn't make enough in oil this year, so we can't fund this public infrastructure project.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, sorry, we can't switch to green energy because we didn't make enough oil money.
Nick, I have no idea. Is there public pools in Germany?
So what's more common here is that you'll have public swimming ponds, which are often like old quarries that have been repurposed as like a pond. So it's what it is that right, you have these open pits, and I'm sure you have them in New Jersey and
Yeah, it's
that
like
area as
it's usually
well.
like ice blue color water because for some other reason. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. I mean, here, some of them even still have some sort of plant hooked up to them on the other end, which is extracting some sort of resource from the water, whether it be mineral or otherwise, or if it's just abandoned at this point. But usually you end up with pretty cold water, pretty clean as well. They get turned into not just pools, but also like wildlife sanctuaries. So they just opened one back where we used to live, and it was great because we would just bike 20 minutes and be at this absolutely gorgeous pool, nature preserve, like birds everywhere, animals. And there were areas to grill out, to put our towel out, and there was a little beach as well. And that's super foreign to me because in New Hampshire, like we either went to the ocean, our shit public pool,
Yeah.
and we like, when I was older, started going to some of the lakes up north, but that was not super common for me. A lot of them have mercury in it, which is kind of an iffy bet.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, we have exactly like one of those quarries that has been turned into a public pool or like a public swimming area, mostly because they left a lot of mining equipment in the pit, and it takes a lot of effort to go out, and you have to drain the whole pit, search for the mining equipment, pull it out, and then let it fill back up with rainwater. So it's a big public investment to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I almost think they're better than public pools because you don't have this, you're not like soiling the water with chlorine.
Yeah.
And because it's big enough and you're building some sort of ecological system where it can kind of treat itself a little bit. And I think the reason that like in New Hampshire, we don't have more of this is A, we don't spend money on anything. And B, most of the open pit quarries that we have, because we do have a lot for granite. I mean, we're the granite state, but they're too big. The pits, I mean, some of the pits, if you were to fill them with water, I mean, they would be like 100 feet deep or more. And
it'd be ice cold all year long.
Yes, it would just be frozen in the middle of July.
Yeah.
And that's not what you want for a swimming hole.
The pod homes. All right.
Is this the ADA thing or is this something else?
It's kind of an ADU thing, but it's just this development in San Antonio where, they apparently don't have the minimum lot sizes that most American cities do have. I think like Houston is like this in parts of the city, but basically it's this suburban kind of road. Maybe it's got a cul-de-sac on it, but it has all these like tiny like 350 square foot and 660 square foot homes, both priced at like 135K and 171K, and a lot of people are making it to be out like the next big thing, and like this is what we can do if we legalize this kind of development. But it does look pretty dystopian in a way, just because all these homes kind of look the same. I mean, it's basically just like your typical Levitt town, but they're all very tiny and presumably much more affordable.
Can you share your screen? Like, I know this is not going to do much for the viewers, but I'm genuinely curious.
Oh, you can check the link.
I can just send you the Twitter link. It should be in the
okay.
Google Doc.
It is like return with a V to Sears homes. It's like bring back Sears catalog homes.
Yeah.
Oh god.
These things are like 10 feet wide and something like 20 feet long. That's what it seems roughly like, just eyeballing. And they all have a parking spot in front of them. So you pull right up to your door, right up to your porch, and then you walk around your car on the grass to get into your house.
Yep.
What? I don't understand the craze with tiny homes. Like, have an apartment, have a townhouse, live in a bungalow. But why does it have to be a tiny home? Why does it, like, if you want less shit, just buy less shit. Like, you don't have to live in a tiny home to have less stuff and to live like a minimalist. I don't get
These
it.
aren't really tiny homes, though. I see how it's similar, but like a tiny home is basically just a trailer.
Yeah, this is like what was a starter home in 1960.
Yep. Yeah, you just like get to actually own the land. I mean, yeah, granted, like the footprint's a lot smaller than your 1960s home, but I mean, I guess like if you go back a little further than that to like the actual like Sears homes where you could get your flat packed California bungalow and build it with your boys in an afternoon for a few weeks straight,
all delivered
it's
by
more
rail.
like that.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the hubbub about this is there's people who think that this is the solution to building costs because they're like, oh, well, if you can sell all these homes for $125,000, like clearly the issue was building cost, and now you solve this problem by making 500 detached tiny homes, which once they're EOL, 20 years from now, you're going to have to tear it down and build a slightly larger home, but not that much larger because you're already on a lot that's only like 25 feet wide. And you're not going to be able to go and put a bunch of attached homes there because if you have you're not going to have a detached home next to an attached home. It just that like the math doesn't work out there. Your party wall can't just be sitting on someone's property line without it being attached to their home.
Yeah, and I think these are like it is pretty cursed just to see them all lined up on one street and like nothing else. But I do think that these would be a lot better in like a traditional suburban neighborhood where people have backyards or front yards that they don't really use, and you could plop down one of these homes, you could develop it yourself, and in some states you're allowed to like sell that lot off and somebody has the opportunity to buy a much smaller home.
Yeah, it'd be great as infill. If you have like 25 extra feet on your side yard, and you're just like, yeah, we can make a whole detached home on that next to my detached home. That'd work. Do ADUs usually have a parking spot and face the street?
I think it depends. Like I don't know too much about other states' ADU ordinances, but I know that a lot of the ADU laws in California do not require additional parking. So most of the time you can just put that down and not add any additional spaces. But I'm sure there's people who develop them and put in a parking spot because they know that's going to help them rent it out quicker or just, fulfill their own mobility needs.
Yeah. And in the end, this development just seems like the solution to, what if we can never legalize like actually building apartments, or we just assume everyone's going to hate apartments because they're not the equivalents of an attached home. Because you could definitely build these number of units as apartments on less land. So clearly there's the regulation is the issue.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is like, I mean, for some people, I think they're going to like it more than a condo because they don't have to deal with an HOA. It gives them an ownership opportunity.
I can see that. Although you're putting yourself in a situation where you will have to move out of this house, at some point, because I don't think tear down and rebuild is really an option in that size of lot.
Yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I think that I guess this is San Antonio, Texas, so if they end up getting really expensive someday, maybe the land value will make people get a little more creative. But yeah, it's hard to imagine going up too high in that small of a lot.
Especially when...
And in San Antonio.
And they're never going to be able to build another parking spot, so obviously it's only meant for individuals, bachelor pads. I want to talk about this wonderful project. It is called the MSG Sphere. And yes, it is that MSG, Madison Square Garden. Basically, in Las Vegas, they built this giant LED array dome near the Venetian Hotel. And basically, they can project whatever they want onto this giant dome. So it's been an image of the Earth, like kind of rotating. They've had giant basketball kind of advertising that a basketball game's on. And then most recently, which really caught headlines, it was a giant eyeball blinking at certain points in time, just like staring down the strip at people driving their cars, which I'm sure is not an issue at all to people driving. But
so it was Big Brother. So they invented Big Brother.
Yeah, it's the Eye of Sauron. Except I'm not sure they could do that. I think they'll get sued. But that would be really hilarious, and I hope someone does that.
Yeah, someone needs to get the licensing for that.
Yes, someone talk to the Tolkien estate. But the funny thing about this is it's also right next to the most expensive public golf club in the United States. So I think it's like $600 a round or something like that, something insane. Or the Tifi, I believe they call it. And it's this globe is just sitting overlooking this really expensive golf course, and I think this is Praxis.
So I see a rendering here, and I can't quite get it to load, but it's the sphere, but it's surrounded by transit. What am I looking at? Wait, are they?
It is next to the monorail. That might be what you're seeing.
It is right next to the monorail, yeah.
Okay, because they make it look way. No. Okay, so this has to be a joke.
No, it looks fake. When you look at it, you're like, oh wow, that's a rendering. It's like, no, this is a very high resolution image. Anyway, I forgot to say this is actually an event venue. It's like a 15,000 seat event venue. That's what MSG does. That's what they do in other places as well. So do you guys want?
Oh, wait a second. No, wait. They're going to build one in London.
Yeah, I think after the Las Vegas experience, I think the Londoners may not want this. Because London's a real city. London's a real city, and Las Vegas is just like a collection of kitsch.
That's true, but what this rendering is showing is they built the sphere between, like, at a railway junction. And so it's like between where the rail lines come together in kind of an unusable piece of land. And it actually looks pretty cool. I'm not going to lie to you. I like this better than the Vegas one. But yeah, maybe they don't want it at that point. Who knows?
Well, I can't say anything about it because I didn't see it.
Yeah, sorry. I guess the viewer will just have to leave it to their imagination or look it up.
I love this one quote in the article. I love seeing people complain about the giant sphere in Las Vegas being an eyesore, as if Vegas isn't a fake town in a desert built by rich people so they can drink margarita slushies at 11 a.m.
That's such a perfect description.
That's very accurate, speaking from experience.
Hey, I think if they're putting this thing anywhere, though, I think Vegas is the perfect place. Like, I'm glad Vegas is embracing being Vegas. I think some other cities could learn from that.
Keep Vegas quirky.
Well, I think at this point, in other cities, like keep Austin weird or keep Portland weird is just kind of a NIMBY thing now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Keep Austin weird. That's the most like Texas NIMBY thing.
Allow corporations to continue doing stupid shit in Las Vegas.
Yeah, let them at it. You know what? Honestly, if we could just pick one city to try all of our stupid ideas on so they don't have to like waste it on the rest of us and like destroy our cities, let it be Vegas. Mm-hmm. There's nothing there anyways. If it went away, very few people would notice.
Yeah.
Maybe not even the people that live there.
I mean, isn't that what the Vegas Loop is?
Yeah. Very much so.
Yeah, okay. It's changed names. I just think Boring Company, Underground Dumb Tesla Tunnel. Those are the only names I know it by.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll wait until a fire consumes it all.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Underground battery fire. That's exactly what we need. Okay. So the least qualified person in the world to talk about New Orleans, would like to talk about New Orleans. So I've never been there. Mike, you've been there, right?
Correct. I was there for 3 weeks.
Okay, and you rode the transit.
Yeah, I rode the bus like a couple times, and I rode the streetcar exactly twice. And there's a story behind that.
Matt, have you ever been to New Orleans?
Yeah, I went a couple times last year.
Okay. And did you take the transit?
Yes, I just took the streetcar. I took some of the newer ones, and then I took like the old one. I think it's called the St. Charles line or something.
That sounds right.
Yeah, that's the one that's been around continuously operating for almost 200 years. It is the oldest continuously operated streetcar in the United States. Now, what I want to talk about today is the effects of Hurricane Katrina on transit in New Orleans and kind of looking at what happens to low-income people when they're forced to relocate inside their own region, inside their own city, and the negative effects of that. So the story of what happened to New Orleans after Katrina, during Katrina, is just a disaster in every way, in a PR fashion, for transit, for the people living there, for affordable housing, for the environment. I mean, so many things came together to really mess with a city full of people who didn't have anywhere to go and really didn't receive the funding they needed to properly rebuild the city, in my opinion. And a huge part of the city that suffered from this was the transit agency, the RTA. So after Katrina, transit in the city was decimated. Ridership decreased from 14% of city residents in 2000 taking transit to only 4% in 2021. They're one of a limited number of cities in modern times that have decreased in transit by that amount. The city today has less buses than it did before the storm, and yet still 17% of residents in the city just don't have a car.
And that's 15 years on?
Yeah, I mean, what was it, 2004, 2005?
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's almost 20 years.
Yeah, I know. Time flies. It's about, 17, 18 years. And if you think about that number, right, 17% of residents don't have a car, and yet 4% are taking transit. So this leaves a significant amount of people, most of whom are lower income and Black residents, who are significantly disadvantaged in finding jobs, in having the opportunities that other people in the city would have, or even that they might have had before the hurricane happened. So after the hurricane, the city was rebuilding its transit system. And at the time, a lot of the investment went towards getting the streetcar up and running. Mm-hmm. Now, they took a lot of flack for this because while the streetcar, it is used by people that live there. It's not totally a tourist line. It's not like the monorail at Disney or the monorail in Seattle or the monorail in Vegas. But it is mainly used by people visiting the city, which is still good, and also by people who maybe have a little bit of a longer, and they don't need to be worried about how quickly they get to work. Because, I don't know, was your guys' experience that it was a little bit slower taking this?
Yes.
Than other forms of transit?
Most of the time, you could, if you really hoofed it, you could walk as fast as the trolley. Because I think you average like around 8 miles per hour around the old town, around the French Quarter.
Yeah, it gets a little better when it gets on its own tracks that just have regular like railroad crossings. But yeah, in the core area, it's pretty slow.
Yeah, and that's what they even said when they were talking about this, is that it rarely gets above single digits, especially downtown. Mm-hmm. And I think certain lines are more affected by this than others. But it's the kind of system which, it exists, it serves a purpose, and it's not completely useless. But it really would need to be expanded or given its own right of way more than it currently does. I think the problem is they really don't treat it like a real form of transit. They treat it more like for tourists.
And even where it does have its own right of way, it doesn't have signal priority. And I think signal priority would probably be the biggest thing.
Yeah, no, and I think that's incredibly important. And it's really interesting because another problem with this as well. So it doesn't have signal priority. It's sometimes not having its own right of way. And it's also not very accessible. Not all the stations are ADA compliant, just because of how old it is. And it's not always super well interlined with the bus network, although they are trying to change that. So, and another thing, so before the hurricane, do you want to guess at what the bus frequency was along Canal Street?
Four is not a real one. 3 minutes, every 3 minutes.
I don't know. Let's say 5 minutes.
Okay, the bus frequency was 90 seconds.
Damn.
Oh, wow.
90 MFing seconds was the headway along Canal.
So, like,
before,
for people who don't know, Canal runs between the biggest tourist district, which is the French Quarter, and the biggest hotel district, which I believe is the Warehouse District, to the other side.
the city really used to care about bus frequencies, about bus transit. I mean, buses in the city really did most of the heavy lifting in terms of transit. Especially as the city doesn't have a heavy rail system, which is connecting the suburbs or, outlying boroughs. So as the city has started to regrow after Sandy, and I mean, I think it's still only at like 80% of what the population was before, not Sandy, before Katrina. Katrina, Matt started smiling.
Katrina,
and I was like,
Katrina. Here comes the hurricane bitch. Here comes the hurricane bitch.
Oh, God. Anyways, so the, the city is, only at about 80% of what it was before the big storm.
Like population-wise, or?
Population-wise,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, but as the city has regrown, what do you think is the largest ethnicity or group of people that have resettled the city? It's a majority black city.
I'd probably say Latin American.
Nope.
No.
Although that is not nothing.
Yeah.
That's probably the second biggest group there. Biggest group resettling the city.
That has to be white people.
Yeah. So here's the deal, right? The city has gotten much more gentrified beforehand. So, this storm essentially did like urban renewal to the city. And now you have a lot of wealthier white people that are moving back in, renovating buildings, building houses, that sort of thing. And so the city is still majority black. And there are a lot of Hispanic people that have moved in as well. But, the thing is, a lot of white residents that move into a city generally tend to be wealthier, tend to be less reliant on transit. So this is really a story of service getting worse and what happens to low-income residents when they're forced to move within a region, right? So a lot of people got forced out of their homes. Maybe they didn't move super far away, but a lot of them didn't end up moving into the same house that they had before because the same house might not exist. I mean, there's still a ton of open lots and areas which have just been completely retaken.
And yeah, you see like the neighborhoods that are very close to the city center, where a lot of people who worked at the city center, and usually in the tourism industry, those neighborhoods have like one house in every like 6 still standing, and this is still in a flood zone. So the only way they can really maintain through the next storm is to raise their home.
Yeah, exactly. And this kind of stuff is only going to get worse with climate change. And Katrina was bad, and it was also very much a man-made disaster because the levees break. But what I'm worried about is what's going to happen for the next storm that doesn't just break the levees because they're poorly engineered or maintained, but just overwhelms them because it's a storm that those things weren't designed to handle. That's what scares me. But this story is not completely a downside. This is not totally a negative story. I don't want people to lose interest. This is the beginnings of what I think looks like a pretty reasonable redemption arc for the city. So one quick point. So the RTA has realized that when people were forced to move, they were forced to move to further out boroughs, former suburbs where a lot of white people had moved to, during the 50s and 60s. And because that's where the affordable housing was, right? A lot of these houses are more run down, it's cheaper. And studies really do show that as you get out into these areas, or when you move around too much in a region, your transit usually gets worse because transit, when it's good, actually drives up the land value, drives up the value of a place. But what the agency is trying to do is they want to, and they are embarking on a journey to kind of reinvent transit in the city. First steps taken a few years ago was that ferry service from Canal Street was increased to frequency of every 30 minutes. A new ferry terminal was opened to kind of better integrate with the streetcar. So now a lot of the hospitality workers and tourists who live just across the river to the east have better connection to downtown. So you've got a lot of people who now can actually take water transit to get into the city plus streetcar. And I think that's a really interesting move because the closest bridge that crosses this river is for the interstate. So I think this is really going to be a good start to kind of help better integrate the streetcar and make it more useful. I don't know. Were you guys in that area by where the ferry service is?
Yeah.
I think it's called Algier, Point Algier or something.
I saw where it was. The one big thing with the reason that they don't have any bridges over that is because they still do a lot of shipping into that area. And how high you need to make a bridge makes it kind of untenable.
Exactly. So that was the first step. This new ferry terminal just opened, I think, earlier this year. And the next thing, and this is really the heart of the story about the redemption arc, they're currently working on an overhaul of the city's bus network. Now, the majority of this was implemented last year, and it was designed with the idea of bringing frequent transit service within a half mile of a much greater portion of the city's residents and the city's jobs. So the agency has made improvements to its fare payment system. It's also still working on reliable real-time information, which is updated in the mobile app. But what was interesting about this network is it used to be a network back in the day that served a majority of the residents. I mean, I actually think it was a pretty good bus network.
It's like the lower Ninth Ward just like doesn't exist anymore. So it's like all those people need to go somewhere, and like Desire area and St. Claude.
Yeah, and I will tell you shortly where they've gone. But first, so the new CEO is Lona Hankins, and she is a local resident, and she's somebody who's had some hard jobs before. But in the words of a transit advocate, she gets shit done, and she always comes out on top. Nice. This is the kind of person you want running your transit agency because she is able to better identify with a lot of the local residents. She's from there, as far as I understand it. And her goal is, so far, since March, been steadily improving reliability, because one of the things that you need to have a successful transit agency is reliability. The buses need to show up when they're supposed to, or often enough that it doesn't matter if they're on time. But the next step has been this project that we mentioned, the network overhaul. So it was started under her predecessor. It's called New Links. Mm-hmm. And specifically, the very specific goal was to double the share of households of color, low income, and zero car that are within a 10-minute walk of transit that comes every 20 minutes or less, and to double the percentage of jobs within a 10-minute walk of frequent transit. It's a very specific and attainable goal. And it sounds like they've done it. So with this New Links project, they've actually achieved the goal. There was a lot of pushback. Residents were like very concerned because the previous CEO did a pretty bad job with messaging and saying like, this is why we're doing this. But at the end of the day, people have started to realize that actually this is leading to lower times in transit, buses coming more often, and them maybe taking less transfers.
Has a lot ahead of her because I do know it is a chronically underfunded organization. So hopefully they can move around the buses in the right way.
That I think speaks to the fact that they still have less buses than they did before Katrina.
Well, one thing I will say about the RTA in New Orleans is it is kind of a job I would want because it is a perfectly gridded city, and it's very nice to make a perfectly gridded bus network.
Perfect city skylines city that you would design. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I think that because this agency is so bus heavy, it allows for a lot of very quick changes to happen for a decently low price. As much as I'm more for tracked transit, the advantage of buses and the disadvantage of buses is the flexibility. Mm-hmm. They're a lot easier to get rid of, but they're also a lot easier to build, to move around, to shift over a few streets if you realize you're off in your projections. And I think that's kind of what they've proven with this New Links thing. Mm-hmm. But that's also kind of what they proved when Sandy absolutely wiped them out and all the funding went to the tracked transit. So in addition to this New Links plan, the city is also planning its first BRT line. Now that the majority of the affordable housing is outside of the city, the preliminary route was approved by the city council in March. It will connect New Orleans East, New Orleans West Bank, and these two clusters of outlying neighborhoods. They will be connected to downtown job centers via the BRT. So currently, bus service to New Orleans East crawls along with the rest of vehicle traffic, idling at red lights, familiar story, and stopping very frequently, very long at stops with no shelters or no lighting. Reliability is also a significant challenge with the current bus network. However, this BRT line really is moving forward, and it's expected to be built up to the best standards. They're doing the classic US city thing where instead of using the internet, they're traveling to, like the agencies like sending people to travel to all the best BRT systems, but only in the US. So I really hope they don't go to Boston. I'm so embarrassed by our system. But yeah, so the outlook for New Orleans is positive, and I'm really curious to see what the BRT line does. Hopefully that opens up to, in the future, maybe expanding more BRT, more light rail, and more water taxi type service.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I just looked real quick at the route map, and it looks pretty solid, honestly. Like, I think it'll hit a lot of those good job centers, like you said. It will be interesting to see kind of how it goes in terms of architecture and how much protected lane infrastructure it has and signal priority and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think it looks pretty interesting. And the one real novel thing that it does is it makes use of that one that one highway bridge. There's only like one highway bridge that goes across the whole river right there to actually connect between both sides of the city. So it really connects the north and the south side of the city.
So yeah, with this BRT system you've been talking about in New Orleans, that reminds me that we did have a BRT service in the United States open this week, which is the BRT in Spokane, Washington. I think it's called the City Line, and it connects a few of the major destinations through the central area of Spokane. It's kind of interesting because it barely has any bus lanes or dedicated infrastructure for buses. It just has some nice boarding platforms. It has buses that let you board on the left side and runs every 15 to 30 minutes.
Does it have off-board fare payment? It kind of looks like it does.
I think it does, yeah.
I said that's good at least.
Definitely. It seems kind of similar to the rapid ride buses that they have in Seattle, where it's kind of a BRT light system.
Mm-hmm.
But it is kind of interesting to see how a transit project like this in America gets branded as something special. I mean, it's great to see good bus improvements, but you can't really say that this is like a rail replacement because it's very much just a slightly fancier bus.
Ooh, I was just hit with the stick. Frequency 15 to 30 minutes.
Yeah, it's not excellent there, which is a shame.
If you're spending, a good amount of money to buy these brand new articulated Excelsior buses that I believe are battery operated as well.
Yep.
So it's like you put all that money into that, and you also get all the charging stations, you get all these new stations, and you only run 15-minute peak, 30-minute off-peak. Kind of a kick in the pants.
Yeah, it's a shame. Especially because, those are some of the most expensive transit buses you can get in the United States. I know just the regular, like 60-foot New Flyer Excelsior electric buses are over $1.2 million. And these are custom ones that have those left doors for boarding. So I'm sure they're even more.
Oh, yeah. Because they need both sides because they do left and right, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like it almost sounds like they want to follow the Boston model, except without the dumb tunnels. Because like the Silver Line, the Boston BRT thing, it's almost like negative. You have your basic bus, you have like a slightly better bus, you have BRT, and then you have the Silver Line. It's like negative. It's like sub-basement level.
He's putting his hand below normal bus.
Yes, it is bus negative. It is bus slow transit,
Yeah.
basically.
It's painful because what does it say? The estimated development cost was $92 million. What was the final on that? Oh, so they actually finished under budget
Oh, wow.
at $78 million. That's insane. So
Dang.
you finished a project under budget, but still $78 million. That's
Yeah, I mean that is pretty good, honestly. I mean, only $78 million, and they did get something that's better, but yeah, it really just makes you realize that they probably should be spending a lot more money than that.
yeah, especially
that money that was supposed to go to dedicated lanes went to being under budget, maybe.
you look at these photos and they actually like tore up the street and made these stations. So it's wild because you're putting that much effort into something that is only a slight improvement above the thing that you had before.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I feel like buses just never get the respect that they quite need to. You know, they're not really super visible, and I think in some places having this dedicated infrastructure will kind of tell people it's there and help more people figure out it's an option. But yeah, it's hard to say how much it's going to help if it's only going to run every 15 to 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
We put too much focus in the US on every transit project needs to have a big opening. It needs to be some success for a politician. And while that's fine, it takes away from us doing the things, the behind the scenes work that needs to happen. Some stuff really should go under the radar, even successes, not just failures.
Whenever I go to a city, I always try to take their buses, even though it's such a pain in the rear to figure out. I think one advantage that they do get from having this branded line is people coming to that location will actually know, okay, this city line is a thing. Under like your normal local bus, which is like a set of 3 numbers, and you have to figure out like what sort of 3-number thing are you going to.
Definitely. And I think I don't know if they enabled it yet, but it seems like the fare collection technology they choose will allow you to just tap a regular credit card, which is nice. So that's one extra barrier removed.
We need more.
We want more buses per minute.
Definitely. Yeah. And I'm hoping they can get there someday. I think that it is potentially problematic that they chose the most expensive articulated buses. So if they want to increase service, it's a little pricey to get more buses. They need to do that. Definitely seems like a good start.
Yeah, and starting with articulated buses also means you're trying to do less buses with higher capacity rather than more buses with lower capacity.
Yeah, but it is nice to have that room because, I mean, I'm sure if it does get pretty popular, you want to have some room to move around. So yeah, I recently saw in the news that the Brightline West project got a finding of no significant impact for, I guess, their last part of the line that's being cleared environmentally. So the project's going to go from Rancho Cucamonga, which is a suburb in the Inland Empire, to the east of Los Angeles, and that's going to go the whole way.
You just said like 2 things that mean nothing to a lot of people. What is the Inland Empire?
Well, yeah, the Inland Empire is just the suburban sprawl that's all, into San Bernardino and Riverside County to the east of LA. So kind of feels very much like your typical Sunbelt region, but they do have a few commuter rail lines, and hopefully someday soon we'll have one of America's first true high-speed rail lines. Yeah,
and so does this have any sort of connection with California high-speed rail? Is this anywhere close to where it's terminating?
Yeah, so Brightline West will start, in Rancho Cucamonga, like I said, but there's 2 possible ways that could connect with California high-speed rail. One would be just going along the current Metrolink San Bernardino line to LA Union Station, which right now, or as the plans currently state, it won't get upgraded to allow electric trains to ride on it. So you would need to transfer unless they make big upgrades. But the connection that Brightline West officially wants to pursue with California high-speed rail would be via Palmdale. So Palmdale is north of Los Angeles, currently connected with a commuter rail line called the Antelope Valley Line, but some upgrades to that line, or potentially using the future tunnels that the California high-speed rail system will run on, they could run Brightline trains up to Palmdale. And then LA Metro actually is studying a different project that would connect Palmdale with the Victor Valley around like Victorville, California. So, that would potentially be your one-seat ride from Los Angeles the whole way to Vegas, would be going up through Palmdale, then going across the high desert, and then going through Victorville, and then going up to Las Vegas. But yeah, the project will originally start in Rancho Cucamonga, so maybe someday it'll have 2 branches and they'll join trains and couple them together like Deutsche Bahn does.
Yeah, because like Palmdale is to the west of their current alignment, so they'd have to go something like looks like 20 to 30 miles to the west to meet up with Palmdale.
Yeah, and I think if California can ever figure out how to turn their commuter lines into regional lines, it's not that uncommon here to take an IC to one city and then take a regional line to connect with a different IC somewhere else, having like a 2 connection ride. It's less ideal, but
when it first starts up, if you're starting in LA, you would take the Metrolink San Bernardino line out to Rancho Cucamonga. And in the environmental documents for Brightline, they do say that they would help fund additional weekend service to make sure that there are more trains. And with some other infrastructure investments that are being made along the line, they'll hopefully be able to get to 30-minute frequencies in each direction for the train. But they would still be like, a diesel classic American commuter train. Brightline project is interesting because it first started out as a different project called Express West, and many years ago a different company was trying to advance this project forward, and they started working out some of the details of how to acquire the right of way, but eventually Brightline West actually purchased the project from them.
Yeah. Didn't they want to do car trains, or like the ones that where you bring your car with you?
I can't remember.
Okay.
They may have.
But yeah,
I've heard of Express West. I did not know that turned into Brightline West. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that process started earlier then. Okay. Because for me, it always feels like in California, the environmental reviews are weaponized against transit and good housing. And that's why I was just a little bit weirded out that the private projects seem to finish their environmental
they also
reviews
are benefited from going through like what is very much just a desert rather than farmland, and the farmland obviously has some more technical hurdles, especially because there's a lot more land acquisition going through the Central Valley instead of going straight across the desert between LA and Las Vegas. Yeah,
and they don't have quite as many freight railroads to deal with. Like going up through the Cajon Pass, they will have to deal with some of that with the right of way, but yeah, California high-speed rail going through the Central Valley, like they have to build so many structures to go over the freight railroads, under the freight railroads, just, they can't impede that service. But yeah, and Brightline West, a lot of it will just be in the freeway median of the 15, just going the whole way up to Vegas. So yeah,
in the middle
it is
nowhere.
A much easier project in that kind of scope, but it is kind of interesting to see all this come together to where like one of the first true high-speed rail lines in the United States will go from Rancho Cucamonga to Las Vegas.
Yeah, I do like that it is an incremental project. So it is proof that like you not like incremental as in turning a non-HSR line into an HSR line, but it's like creating an HSR line which isn't the full segment that you want from the beginning. But it does do at least one useful thing, which it takes you from a transit station to the major city of destination, which is also a transit station. It's going to connect in with the monorail, right?
So not at first, at least. It's the site of the station in Vegas is on the southern end of the strip, a little bit south of the airport. So it is a little bit out of the way. It's pretty close to like the major bus corridor that goes up and down the strip, which is called the Deuce. I don't know if they'll reroute that to actually connect to the Brightline West, but yeah, there is also another like strategic long-term plan in the Nevada State Rail Plan, which would extend the monorail south of its current terminus. And instead of going to the airport, which is probably where people thought it would end up going for a while, it will instead go to the Brightline West station. But I don't think they've actually funded this. But at least in Vegas, I think once the politicians and leaders realize that this Brightline West high-speed rail project is actually going to be a thing, like I could totally see them actually getting it together and figuring out a way to extend the monorail. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe my hopes are too high.
I mean,
Why can't it go to both? Why can't it go to both? That's what I want to know.
'cause
Why
the
can't they
terminal-
have a monorail that goes to the
terminal
airport
is kind of
and
like-
to the train station.
it's weird. It's weird because you'd have to either go under the airport or you'd have to do this really weird loop around the airport because the airport's kind of like tucked into this little like weird L shape north of the Brightline station.
I want what I want.
Sorry. Sometimes you just get what you need.
Yeah, they do have a pretty good thing going though with like the real estate. I mean, they're going to own some land and do some development, so I guess we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're going the Japanese route.
They own half our Rancho Cucamonga. I have no
Right
idea. I'm
now,
just
it looks
making
like
things up.
it'll just be one very big parking lot, but
Ooh.
we'll see what else they put there.
Have you guys ever heard of this thing called a fireman's fair?
I don't think I have.
Is it for straight people?
Yeah, no, this isn't like the Bear Week or you know whatever, and this isn't for Twitter flaming hot takes either. So, fireman's fair is actually a way to fund our fire departments in New Jersey. So, the majority of our fire departments are actually volunteer only. So, the only way that they really get upgraded equipment or upgraded firehouses is through getting these donations. So all throughout the summer, every single town in the whole area will be having a fireman's fair for the whole weekend. So it's weekend after weekend, every single week you get a fireman's fair. I always thought that was kind of interesting as it kind of creates this full jam-packed summer of doing events. And what they have is like there's fair operators and they'll have like a gravitron and like the spinning cups and the Himalaya and like if you've ever been to a fair, you know these rides, and they'll just pick up this equipment, move it 2 towns over, drop it down, and then that town has a fireman's fair. So it's like it's like a cool way to like have a sense of community in all these different places.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, no, I love like civic engagement stuff like that. They have a lot of that in Germany here, not necessarily for that. What most people don't realize is that the majority of beer festivals and things of that nature are actually fairs. So you have your beer tent, but you also have carnival rides, you have games, you have stuff for people of all ages. And honestly, I love that sort of thing. I mean, it really feels like it brings the community together. So I'm really happy to see somewhere in the U.S. doing that on a consistent basis. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, and there's this one additional thing that we do because in Monmouth and Ocean County, it's almost 100% volunteer fire departments. So on New Year's Day, they'll open up every single fire department to people, and every single fire department will cook food and have beers. And what they'll do is they'll have a few sober fire truck operators driving you between fire departments, and you'll just kind of do like a pub crawl between fire departments, and they'll do a loop. So you'll go to like 15 different fire departments in the area, like eating food and like hanging out with the firefighters at that area.
Oh, that's awesome.
Where I grew up, we had a yearly fireman's jubilee that was just a small fair with rides of dubious safety, but it was a good time.
Yes.
It brought people out. It was just on some soccer field in town, and people would, I don't know, win bags of goldfish that wouldn't survive very long, or get funnel cake and other delicious fatty foods.
Fried Oreos.
Such as dysentery.
Was your town also volunteer?
I think one of the boroughs was.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So basically what you're telling me is it pays for the fire department and then they use the entire budget all at once when one of the rides collapses and like kills half of the town.
That's someone else's problem.
Jeez.
Yes.
We're all just gonna be completely silenced until you say something.
Wow. Well, was that another riveting episode of the Better Places podcast?
See you guys next week. Say that.
We'll see you guys next week. Does that mean that we are recording another one next week?
It doesn't have to be next week.
Yeah.
Hey, we got to give the people the content they need.
There you go.
All on that grind set.